Many of you know that we had our Euthanasia Symposium in Connecticut a little over a month ago or so, and it was quite an excellent event. Elaine was there, so that was nice, and a few others were there, but there was also had quite a few people online who joined us. And Melissa made an excellent presentation at that event, but there isn't a lot of time at a conference because you're sort of limited to a time frame or moving on with speakers, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, I contacted Melissa and said, we have to do this discussion again, and we have a bit more time to have a discussion then. And so this is what we're doing today, and I'm glad you joined us. So the first thing we're going to do is this is going to be more of a conversation format between Melissa and myself, and at the end, we'll make some time for questions. So it'll be nice and easy, sort of like a relaxing presentation on assisted suicide and disability. But I first want to ask Melissa really about herself, because she's now working with Able Americans, and she can tell us a little bit about that. And first of all, tell her about herself, because I've not even introduced her. Melissa, take it away.
Oh my, what is there to tell about myself? I come from a long line of very independent, strong-minded women. And I showed up 2 months early. I was born 2 months early and kind of took it away after that. I showed up and they weren't prepared for me. And I went home and slept in a turkey box for the first 2 weeks of my life until they could get out and buy a proper bassinet. They realized immediately that there was a problem. They did not think I would survive through the birth. My mother and my father have been trying for 5 years to have a baby. My mother had a daughter from her previous marriage, and they had been trying with no success. And apparently all it takes is to be in a commuter marriage, because my mother was in graduate school in Nashville. My dad was working at his job in Atlanta, and there was a weekend visit and I appeared on the scene. So they didn't even realize that my mother was pregnant until she was about 5 months along, from what they could calculate. And the doctor said to her, he said, I can't get a heartbeat. You're clearly pregnant. All the blood tests are showing that you're pregnant. The x-ray shows that there is a baby in there, but there's no heartbeat. And I really would encourage you, because you're placenta previa, to have a DNC. And my parents were not people of faith at that point. They grabbed each other by the hand and said, no, we've been in love with each other since we were 17 years old. We found each other again. We want to have a baby together, and tell us what to do to make this pregnancy viable, if at all. And they said, well, we had a heartbeat last week. Let's check again next week. And of course, clearly there was a heartbeat, because I'm here. And at the end of the 7th month, they took me because my mother was hemorrhaging so badly that she kept having to have transfusions. And she had been in bed, sewn closed. I don't mean to be graphic, but that's just the best way to put it. She was sewn closed. They took her into the emergency delivery room to do the cesarean section, not thinking that I was even going to live. And they thought they were going to lose her too. And so they yanked me out, put me aside, and lo and behold, after they did a hysterectomy under blood to save my mother's life, I was in the incubator humming a song. And they clearly realized that, oh, the baby's viable. And not only is she viable, clearly she's got an ear for music, and let's just see what happens. I got a letter every year from my mother's OBGYN until he died, telling me how grateful he was that my parents had gone against his advice and had been determined to have me. Now, my original diagnosis was cerebral palsy, and I have had meningitis 4 times, one of them meningococcal disease that I had at 9 months of age that they thought that I wouldn't live through either. Apparently, I'm really strong-willed, because I wasn't supposed to live through this last year and a half either, but I'm still here. So, like I said, I came through a long line of really stubborn women. And I was privileged and honored to be raised in the South. It has its flaws, but for what it taught me about self-confidence and the things that my mother allowed me to do, I did everything everybody else did. My mother was a teacher, as was her mother before her, as was her grandmother before her, as was her great-grandfather. So guess what? I became a teacher too for a while, but that's another story for another day. And my original diagnosis was cerebral palsy, with all these things that kept happening, the meningitis again. And flipping out of a baby booster seat in a restaurant in Atlanta. And somebody said, there's no way you can remember this because you were 2.5. I said, oh no, I remember hitting my head because I was reaching for the fork on the floor that I had dropped after being told not to. And I looked at my mother as she's taking me off to the bathroom to examine me and see if everything is okay. And I said, you told me not to. And apparently that became somewhat of a mantra over the years of, you told me not to, or I disobeyed, mommy, but I had a better idea, mommy. And so that became kind of a mantra between us over the years. Fast forward through, middle school, the best thing that my mom did for me, because I grew up around a whole bunch of people that really didn't want me participating in cotillion with their precious little daughters and sons who were completely able-bodied. And I don't say that to be snarky and mean, it's just the truth. And Dan's smiling to himself because he knows darn well my comms director is on with us, and he knows darn well I'm being snarky, so I may as well just admit it. And I don't say it to be ugly. I do mean to be snarky, but not ugly. So my mother wanted to go and live in Israel for 2 years. So we went. I have a sister who's 10 years older than I. She had gotten married. I'm in middle school, and off we went. Best thing my mom could have done for me, because in the early to mid 70s in Israel, they had a very different idea about disability because of what the Jewish nation, the Jewish people had been through in the Holocaust and in the founding of the state of Israel, and then the war, the ensuing wars. They had a very different idea about people participating in mainstream society if they had a disability. And it caused me to be determined when we came back stateside that I was going to participate. Whether I was welcomed or not, I would create my own place to be welcomed. Now, let's back up for a second. You notice I don't talk about my dad. My dad died when I was 5. And my mother was left with, he had metastatic melanoma, and my mother was left with a 5-year-old with profound mobility impairment. And what they desperately wished was an impairment on my ability to think quickly on my feet and have a quick tongue, but that never materialized. I'll get to that in a second. And my sister was 10 years older than I and was hell on wheels going somewhere to happen. And she's great. She also came from the same long line of independent women that I did. And so my mother walked away from my father's graveside, and she straightened her hat like a good Southern woman and pulled the veil back down and put her gloves on. And she said, all right, girls, this is our life now. Let's go live it. We are not going to live in defeat. We're going to go live our life and go forward. Best thing she could have done. So I'm probably going to jump back and forth because I keep remembering things that I want to tell you when I tell you about myself. So, and I'll try to go quickly. The last thing I want to tell you about my growing up years, besides graduating from high school and going on to college and paying for college with scholarships that I earned through the Miss America scholarship pageant. Yes, I competed on my crutches in the Miss America pageant system in the 80s with the big hair. And they used to tease me. They said, Melissa, we're glad you have these crutches because your hair's so big, you're going to topple over. And I said, no, you're right. You're right. So when I was 3, because I wasn't walking, they took me to see a neurologist at Eggleston Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where we lived. It's before my dad died. And they said, we want her run through as many tests as you can put her through. We want to know what we need to look for, what we need to make sure she gets educational supports, et cetera. And the doctor got out this Fisher-Price barnyard set, and you can still find them on eBay today. He lined it up. It had the animals, the courtyard, the barn, and the people. Now the animals all had posable limbs, but the people, do y'all know what I'm talking about? Those weird tube things with
actually,
heads on them?
we have the same thing in our basement still.
I should have told you I was going to tell you the story so you could bring it up. And the people all had heads, but no limbs. Their limbs were painted on. And so I lined all the people up very neatly at the edge of the corral, and I'm playing with the animals. I'm having interaction with the animals. I should also tell you that my sister was an Olympic caliber equestrian. So I knew all about horses, and I'm, putting the horse through its paces and doing all that. And the doctor looked at me and he said, "Why aren't you playing with the people?" Now, as a pediatric neuropsychiatrist, I know what he was looking for. He was looking for some upsetness or some flaw in my psyche where I felt ashamed. And I looked at him without missing a beat with the long gold braids hanging down. I said, "They don't have any arms and legs, and I might hurt them. I don't think that's a good idea. Do you?" And went right back to what I was doing and pretended like he just completely dismissed him. My parents were sitting there. My dad laughed. My mother was horrified. And the doctor looked at my parents and said, "God help you. There's nothing wrong with this kid's brain. And if you could ever get a bridle on her mouth, do it. Dan, that's not giving you permission." So anyway, so
we've handled where you came from.
yeah, okay. So let's move forward. I'm sorry. I tell those stories to kind of build cred of, no, I didn't sit in private schools and wear white gloves and party manners. Yes, I did, but I did it because my mother paved the way for me. And I wish all children with disabilities had the advocate that I had in my home. Now, off I go to college. I pay for school with the Miss America scholarships, almost all of it, and graduated with very little student loan debt. A lot of mad girls in my path, but hey. So off we go. And I had developed an interest in politics early on at the age of 4. And I determined that my career was going to be political communications. Took a while to get there. I taught school. I did all these other things. But then in 2008, I had gotten married and my husband decided he wanted to go to graduate school. The best graduate school for his program that he wanted was here in DC. So we moved to DC and I was quite happy with that because in the 80s, I had lived in DC and worked on the House and the Senate side of the Hill. So I was delighted to be back. The thing that I noticed that bothered me, and I worked on the McCain-Palin campaign in 2008. We lost. I really pushed them on disability policy to be very open about it. Looking back, I don't know that they took all of my advice, but in 2011, I founded Able Americans because I wanted there to be representation on both sides of the aisle for disability issues. It's necessary. Now, I want to work with anybody that wants to work with me. I don't care what you believe politically, religiously, philosophically. I want people with disabilities to have the best living standard and navigational framework that they can possibly have. And neither side has all the answers. So we have to come together and work together. And I started Able Americans as a right of center idea and a place for people to go that didn't necessarily align with the left of center. And it grew a little bit. And then I had an opportunity to be the commissioner of the Administration on Disabilities for President Trump. And I left that. I did not find the job exactly what I really like to hear people's stories and tell stories and advocate for people. And I was busier running programs than I was truly helping individuals and meeting individuals. And that was hard for me just with my makeup. So as God would have it, I got really sick and had to leave my job. And that one thing led to another. And for 5 years, I was pretty ill with one thing or another. And then back in the summer, a dear friend of mine ran into my now boss, David Ridenour. And David had this desire because he has 2 children on the spectrum. He and his wife had a desire for years to start a disability policy think tank, part of their think tank, National Center for Public Policy Research. And I like to say that our meeting was a play on the theme song from The Nanny. I had flair, I was there, and that's how I became the advisor. My friend introduced us, and David and I became friends as well as colleagues, and it's pretty amazing. And he passed muster with my husband. I've been known to jump into some things that I shouldn't jump into. So my husband is amazing at interviewing people and seeing what they want with me and what they want with my time and talent and how much they're willing to pay for it. not because I'm money hungry, but because you wouldn't believe, or maybe you would believe, how many people expect people with disabilities to work for free. And I will say this on recorded line: if it is the last thing I do, I will end sub-minimum wage. It has to end. It's not okay. From a moral standpoint, from a religious standpoint, I don't care if you're Hebrew Bible, Christian Bible, what you are. In every major religious belief out there, the idea that someone is worthy of their hire is there. And so we need to follow that. David and I very quickly realized, I went to lunch with him thinking it would be a 45-minute courtesy lunch. And I promised my friend that I would do this. And I don't know about y'all, but I have a very small circle of friends that they can ask me to do anything and I'll go do it, even if I don't know why they're asking me. And this particular friend is one of those people. And he sort of said the same thing to David. I found out last week, David really didn't want to go to lunch with me. He just went to lunch with me to shut my friend up, or at least that's how he likes to tell it. And Dan is smiling again because he knows I think he heard the short version of that. So we discovered very quickly that we had a lot of the same ideas and a lot of the same thoughts and plans for our professional lives. And so a year sooner than he had really planned, I merged Able Americans with National Center and went on staff. So that's just the short version of how we got here. And let me finish one more piece, Alex, and then you can pepper me with questions. From my own experience last year in the hospital, I've seen with my own eyes that euthanasia, medical aid in dying, mercy killing, whatever you want to call it, is coming down the tracks really fast at people with disabilities in this country. And I'm not okay with that. You will not tell me when my life will end, and you will not tell me what you think my level of suffering will be. And that's just not going to happen. My life matters. And every single square that I see in front of me, the pictures and without pictures, your life matters. And I will stand in that trench and fight. We're not going to allow this. So that is all I have to say about that. Alex, go.
Well, there's two things. I wanted you to talk about the story of when you were in the hospital, because I think a lot of it comes together, and then we could talk about assisted suicide from there, I think.
That's the term I was looking for, assisted suicide, that I couldn't come up with. On January 6th of 2021, when some of the people I love most in this town on both sides of the aisle were being held hostage at the Capitol, I was sitting in a doctor's office being told that I had a very aggressive form of breast cancer. And it was not a good day for any of us. I said, all right, what do we need to do? And my OBGYN looked at me. He said, I've already made appointments with you for the best people that I want you to see. And I said, thank you. And he said, and I have one thing to say to you. I said, yes. And he said, the cancer doesn't understand who it's tangling with. Go get it. And that's all I needed, was to be told to fight. Off we go. Then that was January of 2021. And by July of 2021, my body, I was re-diagnosed as having spina bifida in 2008 when we came to DC, and a specialist in spina bifida saw me. And I have spina bifida SBO. I can't remember what the O stands for. I'm having a brain freeze today. And
Can I ask you a question? Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Spina bifida, there's the type that, of course, when you were born, they would have noticed because you would have had an opening.
It was the kind they didn't notice, and they didn't find until 1993 when medical technology found it. It's up here where
it's internal. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. So, somehow all the worst parts of the outflowing of the spina bifida, I got a UTI that went rogue. I got a bowel infection that went rogue, and on those medications, I got C. diff. And my body was so weak from the chemo that I couldn't fight anything off. And they had already said, they'd said to us, you need to talk about an end of life plan. You need to talk about you need to talk to your priest, talk to your family, make sure your paperwork is in order, etc. And so we had just finished doing all that and minding our own business in the hospital room with just the people that we needed in there, my husband and the few people in there. And it got to be late, and he took Annie Oakley home with him. She's my service dog. He took her home with him, and I was lying in that bed by myself reading. I'm an avid reader, so if you've got favorite books, feel free to ping me on Twitter with them, DC Bell on Wheels. And I'm there reading, and all of a sudden this nurse that I've never seen before appears at my bedside, and she's got her hand in her pocket. And I'm a little nonplussed. I don't know quite what's going on. I said, hi. And she said, well, I wanted to come and talk to you. I've been waiting for your husband to leave because I wanted to come and talk to you. Now, bear in mind that every single appointment that I had had with chemo, the doctor, et cetera, that one of the triage questions that they now ask you at this particular hospital, or they did until I had it out with patient ombudsman, was, do you feel like you're a burden to anyone? Are you suffering? Do you feel like you're a burden? If you answer yes, they ask you if you would be willing to discuss options. And the first time a nurse did that to me, I asked for the nursing supervisor, and I never talked to that nurse again. I helped lead the charge on against assisted suicide in DC. We failed miserably because Compassion and Choices financed 4 of the council members' races, and the deck was stacked. I'm laying there, and she's got her hand in her pocket. She starts talking to me about being a burden, and was I suffering, and was I in pain? I looked at her, I said, you do realize I have stage 2 cancer, right? And she said, yes. And she said, you also have all these other things. I said, how do you know? And she started listing off. I said, how do you know? Because I've never seen you before. And from your tag, you don't work on this floor. So I need to understand how you got access to my medical records. Then she kind of backs off. And then she starts talking to me again about assisted suicide, and that there were options, and that, there were people. She said, I work for an organization that can help you. And all of a sudden it clicked in my head. I'm lying there in that hospital bed with my wheelchair on the other side of the room. I do have enough ambulation that I can get to the bathroom and back by myself. It drove them nuts because I would get out of bed and go by myself. But it was either that or have really unpleasant things happen and have to stay in that situation until they were ready to come clean me up. And I looked her square in the face and I said, you work for Compassionate Choices, don't you? And I said, I don't think you know who I am. And I'm thinking, and I'm sure she's thinking to herself, well, you're certainly not the Queen of England, so does it really matter who you are? And I start screaming, and with each syllable, my voice gets a little louder, and then every medical professional on the floor is in my room. And she's escorted out. They realize that she's not supposed to be there. She was a floater nurse through a temp agency. And she doesn't work at that hospital anymore because of this incident. The thing that made me so disconcerted, if she had just stood there and talked to me with her hands on the rail and her hands where I could see them, she kept putting her hand in her pocket. And I was like, oh dear, she has the shot in her pocket. And I suddenly felt like a sick dog at the vet. They know, and I'm like, oh dear, she's got the shot in her pocket right now. And that was what led to the screaming and the mass avalanche of people in my room. I have great advocacy skills. I have a great team of advocates who support me. I have great friends on both sides of the aisle and some really great offices. But what happens to people who don't?
That's right.
And that's what we need to be talking about.
Well, Melissa, a lot of people would think that, and I hate to say it, but I know a lot of people think that people with disabilities are overstating the case. But I will just say simply, in Canada right now, what's going on, and I know you've read the articles and you've seen what's going on. So as you know, when we legalized euthanasia in 2016, it is not, euthanasia is a little different from assisted suicide, but not really. It's different in the way it's done, not with the intention and the drugs used. It's really how it's done. Euthanasia is done by the doctor injecting you, which is how that nurse might have been actually willing to do that day. And whereas assisted suicide is done where they give you the drugs, you have to take it yourself. So it's a little bit different, but the intention, everything's the same. But in Canada in 2021, when they removed the requirement that a person be terminally ill, even though they never defined that in the original law, it said that your natural death has to be reasonably foreseeable. And you probably agree with me, if you don't define that term, what does it actually mean? Natural death be reasonably foreseeable? I don't know. I think all of our natural deaths are reasonably foreseeable. Nonetheless, getting back to my point, what we've seen is a lot of euthanasia of people with disabilities, and the disability movement said it, that this is what was going to happen. They said that what's going to happen is people who are living in poverty, people who are not knowing what to do, they can't live the way they're living. They're not being offered treatment. So we've had cases of people who are saying, I've been approved for medical aid in dying, but which means euthanasia. Medical aid in dying is, it's just a nice word for it, right, Melissa? It's just a word to make us feel better. Anyway, I've been approved, but I don't actually want euthanasia. What I want is treatment, but I can't seem to get treatment. So, this is where we're at today.
Because it's too expensive. It's
Well,
less
that's exactly
expensive to kill you.
And so I'm not saying that's not happening in Oregon at all. It's hard to know because, dead people don't talk. But I mean, the fact of it is that it's because of the numbers and the way it's happening in Canada, we've become the story of, what really does happen when you legalize this and you let it go further and further and further. Obviously, it just multiplies. And who are the victims? Well, it's the people with disabilities. And I thought you should comment on that.
I would love to comment on that. We are seeing, it started back, it's always been a problem, goes all the way back to Aristotle and Plato. They didn't see people with disabilities as worthy of life and worthy of mainstream society. Diane, I see your note. I'll make sure, if you want to get in touch with me, get in touch with me through Alex, please. I would love to talk to you. So, and to partner with you. So, it's not acceptable to me that we're still having this conversation. We're supposed to be further along as a society. And we're supposed to be, we have all these civil rights protecting people with disabilities in place. Dying is not a civil right. I don't know what the Constitution in Canada, what the Canadian governing documents say, but in our Declaration of Independence, and again in the Constitution, it is stated that, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, it doesn't mean, pursuit doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to attain it, but you have the right to live, and nobody can tell you that you have to die. And quite frankly, the one time that I attempted suicide, and I did have a suicidal ideation right after college. I went through a pretty awful time, and my best friend came to see me, and she said, I have one thing to say to you. This is back in the 90s. I said, yes. And she said, if you ever do this again, I'll come help you make sure you finish the job. How dare you? You are loved. You are wanted. And that's what we need to say to other people with disabilities. You are loved. You are wanted. We will help you get the treatments you need. Because what I'm seeing is, it's breaking my heart on Twitter. There's one guy who says he's qualified for it, but he just got a new service dog and he doesn't want to. Yeah. And it's breaking my heart because I know he's in pain. Why can't he get proper pain management? Oh, wait, that's expensive. Why can't he get other things? Because it's expensive.
But his story is actually even a little more complicated. He was getting better services before he turned 65, but because it's this silly Canadian system. As soon as he turned 65 and he was getting his seniors benefit, then suddenly he didn't qualify for all his disability benefits in Alberta because he was now not under disability but under seniors. Therefore, he was saying, well, now you have to pay this much for your drugs and this and that. And he says, well, I don't have money for that. I'm not getting,
this is very helpful.
For all his disability needs, he did not have enough money to live now post age 65, but pre-age 65, he was struggling, but he was getting by.
Right.
That's just to give you more information on his case. But yes, yeah.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to be very straight with everybody. I am part of the pro-life movement. I do believe that babies deserve a right to live. Now, let me say this equally clearly. We are not able to call ourselves pro-life unless we support babies, moms, dads from womb to tomb. From the moment they show up, there needs to be a community of people supporting them until the moment they die. And until we can learn to live in society with each other like that. And I'm not talking about necessarily I'm not talking about a society where everybody gets the same thing and everybody gets, your money that you earn gets taken away from you and given to somebody that won't work. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who have, who need our assistance, who need our support, who need us as fellow human beings. If we have something they can use, we need to be sharing it with them. If we can support them, we need to be supporting them somehow, some way. And that's what pro-life means. Now, that clip is probably going to go viral, but I've said my piece. And I say it to pro-life people all the time. Until we're supporting everybody from the moment they're conceived till the moment they die, we cannot call ourselves pro-life. And that's the nasty truth of it. So people with disabilities should never have to feel alone or abandoned. I had a great family, but even my family didn't do everything right. I had an uncle who had an apartment building. I was basically homeless and without a job at one point, and he had a place for me to work. And he refused to hire me because he said there were too many people in our family already working there. Okay. I managed to find, God provided, not family, but friends stepped up. I know what it is to be disdained and to be told that I'm too much. But I've been very blessed that I have a circle of friends who will step up and help. They also routinely keep me accountable, keep me supported, and keep me living, not just existing. Yep. And that's another key point. Elaine, yes. Ableism is a public health emergency and it is killing us. People don't get it until they live it. And I even in high school, I had a friend who was always very kind to me, but he kind of didn't always want to be seen with me when I was walking because I looked ugly. And he said to me, he ended up breaking his hip and his femur in a pretty terrible car accident in his lower legs. And I went to see him and he could see me coming down the hall and he started to cry. And I said, do they have you on pain meds that you're allergic to? That was my first question. And he said, no, I just didn't think you would come see me. And he said, you're the person I most wanted to see. He said, I'm sorry. I had no idea. And even my own sister, who wasn't real thrilled at the age of 10 for me to show up with all these needs and all this, everything living with a disability entails. She was thrown from her horse and had a very similar break in her leg to my friend. Her hip didn't break, but she called me after 3 weeks and she said, I'm so sorry for every mean thing I ever said to you. And I said, and they have you on how much opium? She said, nobody gets opium anymore. I said, fine, morphine, whatever it is they've got you on, what's loosened your tongue? And she said, no. She said, I get it now. I'd love to tell you that we're best friends now. We're not, and we never will be. There was too much. That's another thing that we have to address is the person with a disability. When a child is born with a disability in a family, the siblings of that child have to be given extra support. Parents need to stop calling their kids special needs. They need to address their children. I go round and round with a couple of people that I deal with on a daily basis about that. It's got to be kids with disabilities or disabled kids because they still need to be seen first as kids who have the same needs as their able-bodied kids. That is a very subtle form of ableism. I understand the usage of the term special needs by parents. I try to gently educate them. I'm frowned at most of the time and sometimes hung up on the phone or the webinar gets shut down, but that's okay. You got to plant seeds. Churches, civic organizations, temples, mosques, what do they call the Hindu place of worship? Jewish temples, Buddhist temples, mosques, Hindu places of worship. The whole spectrum's got to step up and welcome people with disabilities and support their families and support them. One of the most meaningful things I ever saw was when I lived in New York City, that at our church, we had a guy who spent time with a family in his building. They had a child with a pretty profound learning disability and also accompanied with a seizure disorder. And he would take that child once a week and go do something fun with him. Or once every 2 weeks, so that the family could go and do something that that child couldn't do, but the other kids wanted to do. And there were some people who thought that was terrible. They're like, they're excluding their special needs child. Is that awful? I said, no, it's not awful. It gives the other kids an opportunity to do things that they want to do. And it cuts down on the resentment of, we can't do that because Johnny can't go do that. And if Johnny can't do it, then we can't do it. And you'd be surprised how many siblings I've talked to who feel that way. And the child with the disability in the family knows it. They sense it. And sometimes they're even told it in the dark of the night by the little darlings that share their bunk bed or whatever. So I see why. Let's go back to Germany. You know how they sold T4, which was the German killing of people with disabilities, to perfect the ultimate final solution, which killed a third of the living Jews at the time, if not more. They sold it in the middle school, the upper elementary school, the middle school, and the lower high schools, as saying that it was the kind thing to do because it was the prudent thing to do because it was too expensive to keep these people up, and they were useless bread gobblers. And they inbred it into the kids long before they ever first started putting those children in the vans. And so that's what we need to talk about. And I know, hasn't Canada come out with a medical aid and dying coloring book? Did I see that somewhere, or am I just dreaming it?
Well, there is one now. Yes, the MAID providers are promoting this special coloring book, and the idea is that the child can then talk ahead of time before grandma gets killed, and come to acceptance that this is a wonderful thing. And to me, it's once again everything they're doing to normalize killing. But the reason, so this is certainly one of the things we're doing. And of course, we're talking now in Canada about euthanasia of newborns. Of course, newborns can't consent or ask for it.
No.
And these infants, and we're talking of course about euthanasia for people with dementia who can't request it. So the reason we're doing this obviously is because people look at those people's lives and they say, oh, so-and-so would never have wanted to live that way. What they're actually saying is, I don't want to see someone who I knew living this way, so we're gonna kill them.
See it, and I don't want to deal with it because I don't want to see it. I don't want to deal with it because it gets in my way. It's selfishness.
The problem, Melissa, is killing is actually very easy to do once it becomes normalized. Once it becomes normalized, it seems like it's the most reasonable thing to do. And as we say, before Canada passed this Bill C7, which was in March of 2021, which expanded our law, the disability community was saying, the reason this will affect people with disabilities, because of course it didn't say in Bill C7, let's kill people with disabilities. It didn't say that. But what it did say is it defined it as being possible for people who weren't terminally ill, but what they had to have a chronic condition that could not be, how would you say, healed or whatever. In any
couldn't be cured. Yeah.
Couldn't be cured. So obviously speaking, they were talking about people with disabilities.
Absolutely.
And they said, and then you hear the euthanasia lobby saying, but these people are lying because it's got nothing, you can't be approved for euthanasia because of poverty. Well, it just happens to be that an awful lot of people with disabilities are also living in
poverty. Yeah.
Because they're given not enough money to live. They don't have enough money that past paying for their apartment, if they can get an apartment, past paying for that, they have almost no money left for food or anything. And so they're living in abject poverty. And then you legalize euthanasia. And of course, guess what? Because of their medical condition, they qualify. They're not asking for death because they are suffering and want to die. They're asking for death because they're saying, I can't live this way. I got a call from someone around St. Catharines. This man is 61 years old. He's got a degenerative spinal condition, so he's in a lot of pain. I'm not questioning he's in a lot of pain, but he's saying, I don't want to die. He's been approved for MAID. Okay, he's been approved. But he calls us. Why does he call us? Because he doesn't want to die from MAID, euthanasia. He doesn't why he
No.
wants to die. He's calling us because he says, I can't get treatment. And he says that if I can't get treatment, I'm in total pain, then this is available to me and I might die that way. So he's not saying, oh, I want to die that way. He's saying it's available to me. I've been approved already. So we've been trying to help him get the treatment he needs, because there are treatments you can do to, you're not going to necessarily fix his, put it in a situation where he's not in so much pain that he can actually live. And that's what he wants. He wants, and all they were giving him is analgesics. That's all they were giving him. I know that's ridiculous because, as you know, that doesn't do it. You know, that helps a little bit, right? Takes off the extremities of the pain. But I mean, how do you sleep at night? Are you going to drug him?
Even wrap my head around this. I don't know if you can see the fury in my face. I'm about ready to come through the screen. I'm so angry.
Well, Jenny Wu just says you're beautiful and you're also very humorous. So there you go.
I probably should miss my calling. I should have been a stand-up comedian. Oh, excuse me, a sit-down comedian. Thank you, Jeannie. That's very sweet. So let me just throw this idea out to you. I'm going to say something unpopular here. I don't know how many of you read the entire CRPD from the UN, but there is a little clause in there that assigns you, whether you want it or not, an advocate through the international court if you have a disability. And it means they have more power over your medical care than you do. You could tell them all day long what you want, but you can't go to court and defend yourself. They go for you and they say what they think should happen to you. And that is one reason I'm going to say an unpopular thing here, because I caught a lot of flack for it, but I read it. I asked a lot of questions and people told me, yeah, they said that's never going to happen, but it could. Well, you don't think it's going to come to that until it does. So that was the thing that I was very concerned about in the treaty. And I want to go back to this idea. Sure, I can expand on the UN treaty CRPD thing. Sure, I'll circle back to that in a second. But what I would like to say is that whenever you think that something won't come to something, let's just say worst case scenario will never happen, you can bet that it'll be arranged so that it does, because at the end of the day, you and your gut know what the worst case scenario is for you. And trust is, as people with disabilities, we are told that we can't trust our own gut. Why can't we? We absolutely can. And why can't we take care of our family members? We can. My husband, when I was in the throes in one of the worst parts of my cancer treatment, my husband drove every 6 weeks and spent a week in New York City caring for his mother with dementia, to give the 24-hour live-in caregiver a break for 7 days, because that's how she wanted it. And he had my blessing. I was thrilled for him to go. I didn't particularly enjoy being alone for 7 days and kind of having to cobble my own care together. I had great support, so I had the care. That's not the issue. The issue is that my husband is like so many other people, that he was caught between, for him, it wasn't caring for a child with a disability. It was a woman he chose to marry already having a disability. And he told me, and when we celebrated our 20th anniversary in August, he looked at me and he said, I'd do it all over again, every single day of it, because I love you and it's been worth it. And he said, I know it hasn't been easy for you, but you've made my life better. Now, let me back up. When my father-in-law had prostate cancer, and when it came very clear that the end was near. He lived through 22 years of prostate and bone cancer. And we did everything to buy him life, time, and quality of life. And when it finally was time, there was only one hospice in New York City that would honor my father and mother's Catholic beliefs of that life begins at conception and it doesn't end until you die. There was only one. It was Metropolitan Jewish Hospice. They never once talked to us about end of life and would we approve only comfort measures. It was amazing. And the social workers got a little tired of talking to me because I can be a little aggressive about this because I love my father-in-law and I would protect him. I would do whatever it took to protect him and give him the very best possible last years, days, whatever. I'm not going to let someone kill him because they think he's ready to go. He died, and my mother-in-law was already exhibiting very extensive signs of dementia, and that flipped a switch in her. But you can't tell me she didn't know what was going on around her on some level, because when I rolled forward at my father-in-law's grave to sing the Lord's Prayer, I heard someone singing under their breath with me. And my mother-in-law, who was very hard of hearing, very profoundly hard of hearing, as she called herself, and I'm going to honor that. She was singing with me as we laid my father-in-law to rest. And that was beautiful. She wasn't suffering. She was grieving, but she wasn't suffering. And we made sure that she also had a dignity and care until her last days about a year ago.
So we have a quick question from Gordon. Can you
about
expand on that?
CRPD?
Yeah.
I want to encourage everybody with a disability. It's very easy reading, and what you don't understand, ask an attorney and they can explain it to you. And if you don't, John, thanks. Please be in touch. There's this little piece in there about being assigned an advocate, and it isn't somebody that you get to pick. It's not a family member. It is a court assigned. If under the UN Treaty on Disability, a person with a disability, if a child is born with a disability, they are assigned an advocate through the international court, and that advocate has more power over what happens to that child than his or her own parents do. For adults with disabilities, if you're under the treaty and you go in the hospital, you get assigned an advocate, whether you want one or not, and they have more control over what happens to you than the people you ask to make the decisions for you, because that is the way the treaty is written.
Have you written about this? Because I would like to certainly know more about it, and that's important. It's an important thing you're talking about, because obviously
I want to. Yeah.
I'm concerned when, especially in a state where assisted suicide would be legal, that you have someone with that kind of power over you that you've not appointed. Those are times of your life where you want somebody who you've appointed, who shares your values, who will stand up for you. And so, we have similar things in Ontario. If you don't, for instance, if you didn't have if you hadn't appointed somebody in Ontario, then the court can appoint someone to be your advocate if you become incompetent, that is, to make decisions for yourself.
The competence doesn't matter, because again, the ableism thing, people assume, right, especially if you have a neurological disability like mine, spina bifida is a neurological disability. They assume that because your body doesn't work, that your brain doesn't work and you aren't capable. There's this thing that I run into all the time, and it upsets my husband to no end, angers him to no end. And it's really not good to make a New Yorker angry, a native New Yorker. They don't do well with that. People will address my husband. Even after I've given a speech in front of 30,000 people, people will address my husband and ask him what I want and where we should go and this kind of thing. And I see some nods and things like that. And y'all, that's not okay. It's not okay just because you're, and I think, Elaine, you and I talked about this on the phone, about the fact that just because you sit in a chair, suddenly you aren't able to put 3 words together. Don't touch me, or don't talk to me, or don't, it's, Yes, Gordon, it applies in not all UN member countries. It applies in the countries that have signed on to that specific treaty. And we have not yet, the United States has not yet signed on. I don't know how it works in Canada. Do you guys sign on through the
Okay, so
UK or?
Canada signed under the treaty, and that's also why we recently had the that UN report where they did an investigation into our, but that was on the rights of people with disabilities, that investigation into Canada, where they came out and published a report actually attacking our euthanasia law because of how it's affecting people with disabilities. And I think that's an important point because the people who came from the UN, they were coming just to examine how we're implementing the rights of people with disabilities treaty, and what they put in their report was how terrible our euthanasia law is because how it affects people with disabilities is intentionally negative. So, and I can send you that report.
Interesting. I would love to see it.
Yeah, it's worth reading. Yeah. If someone wants to ask a question, we should take a question. And yeah, so Gordon says another reason to
Absolutely,
be wary of
Gordon.
the UN. Thank you for making. Yeah, you know, it all varies. Like the problem is that UN may have that in their treaty, but are they actually doing something about it? I don't know.
Right.
Most countries would have their own rules, and as I say in Ontario, they can apply rules to you. The biggest problem with a lot of these rules is that if they disagree with your power of attorney, the person who you've appointed to make decisions for you, someone who you trust, they will often come in and try and replace that person.
Overrule.
Right.
Look up
Yeah.
the case of baby Alfie in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I
His
can look at that.
parents were not allowed to bring him to the United States because his advocate said no.
Okay, now I understand
And
that. I didn't know.
He died. That's
I
why
thought
he
that was
died.
UK law or UK rules, but you're
No.
telling us UN rules. Okay.
Yeah.
So does
Now,
anybody have a question for Melissa? I'm not trying to cut you off, Melissa. I just figured if
that's
someone
okay.
has a question, they should have a chance to ask it.
Absolutely.
Because if not, then you have a few more minutes to make comments before we wrap up.
There's a book that I would like to encourage everybody to read, and I'll send Alex the name of it. It's a novel that a friend of mine wrote, gosh, 30 years ago, and it's called Duty to Die.
Duty to Die. Okay.
And it is about euthanasia.
I think I have it here.
Okay, her name is Janice Thompson. The book is called Duty to Die. I also would encourage you to get anything written by Johnny Erickson Tata, because she addresses the idea of when is it right to die and does suffering have meaning or purpose. And Charles Krauthammer also addressed the same things. So those are just some people that I would encourage you to read. But that's pretty much. Do we have any questions? I am thrilled to have questions. My email, do you want to just send it out to everybody or want me to?
If they ask, I can send it out to them. That's fine. Or you can just say it now.
I'll just say it now. It's M. Ortiz, my first initial, last name, MORTIZ at nationalcenter.org.
I will say that you commented on the Nazi euthanasia program, the T4 program, and it did start specifically in order to eliminate the lives of people with disabilities. And the history of it is very important, that people forget their history, or they were never taught their history, that it was in those killing centers like Hadamar and places like that, where they were killing off people with disabilities, that they developed the whole gassing system, which resulted in the killing of the Jews and other people. But the millions of people who were killed, it started with the killing of people with disabilities, and there was thousands and thousands of people with disabilities who were considered useless leaders. And to make it even worse, you know, a lot of the families had no idea that their loved one was going to be euthanized. They just didn't know. They were told, oh, well, you know, if you sign these papers and everything, we'll take your child or your teenager or your 30-something-year-old, you know, sibling or whoever you're caring for. We'll take them to a special place and we'll care for them. Little did they know that, in fact, they were going to get a letter a few weeks later talking about, oh, it's so sad, your loved one died of pneumonia. It was pneumonia usually and things like that. Well, no, it wasn't pneumonia. They were gassed to death, and it continued to the end of the war, even though it did change a little bit because of the whole issue of in 1941 you have the whole exposure of the Nazi euthanasia program, which did upset a lot of people. You had the other factor of the Nazi euthanasia program, which caused a bit of a stir, was that there were, of course, soldiers from World War I who were disabled from being soldiers. So they had, loss of limbs. They had all these other issues, and some of them are in these same institutions, and some of them were also killed. So you start getting this, how are you going to have your army willing to fight for you if they find out that your uncle who fought in World War I was killed by the government by being gassed to death for having a disability? It starts becoming pretty iffy if you want to fight for a government after that. So, they started changing, but of course it didn't end until the end of the war. They started just, I shouldn't say just, but then they did a lot more death by dehydration and stuff.
Yep.
But of course,
Right.
this is how they developed the gassing technique for the killing centers. And so as horrible and as horrific that is as a point of history, it was people with disabilities who were the first targets. And that's what's very important about that. And then you say, oh, well, you can't talk about that. That's not what we're doing today. We're not Nazis today. And I always point out, wait a second.
Oh.
The concept, well, wait a second. The concept is eugenic.
Eugenics.
And eugenics predates Nazism.
And we have to address North America's history of eugenics.
Absolutely. And eugenics has not disappeared. Eugenics is changed a little bit. Now we call it freedom of choice, and they emphasize that, but in fact it's not. There's a whole pressure to kill, pressure to eliminate people with disabilities, and it's all under this whole eugenic theme, the useless eater, but we're not going to say it that way anymore. We're going to change it around. We're going to redefine it to make everyone feel better about it. But eugenics predates the Nazis. The Nazis, such as Hitler, he loved eugenics. Absolutely, he did. And so, as you know, there was a lot of Americans governments who instituted these sterilization programs and other things under the whole eugenics ideology. So we don't have to say, oh, these people are Nazis. No, but Peter Singer is a eugenicist. Let's be brutally honest. Peter Singer is a eugenicist, and these people who buy into Peter Singer's philosophy are buying into a philosophy of eugenics. And you can say, and maybe he says it nicely. Maybe he's honest about it because he's actually straightforward. So you could say all these other people who talk in circles, he doesn't seem to do that. He talks straight to you about it. Nonetheless, it's still eugenics, no matter how nice he says it.
He says it with a straight face. It's and he says it so gently and with a straight face that people just accept it. Because Gordon, we don't want to accept. Gordon asked, how is this that this is not obvious to most people? Because we don't want to accept that we haven't moved past those years. So
is there something you want to say, Melissa, before we close? And we could do something again, in 2023.
I would love to do something again. And
so that's fine. We can have a few people on a discussion together. We could do it again. But have you something to say in your closing remarks?
Well, first of all,
assisted suicide, that is.
Thank you for having me here today. Thank you for the opportunity. As long as I have strength and breath to fight this, I will fight it. Let's band together. Let's put everything else aside except the idea that all life is worthy of living.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you, Melissa, for joining us. Thank you. Hopefully we can do this again very soon. Thank you, Elaine, for joining us, and for others. And I'm glad we came together today.